My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people that we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that procurement and sourcing plays in the way we live. If you like today's episode, make sure to rate the program and give us a follow. Today's guest is Canda Rozier, a 30-plus year procurement practitioner who's sat in the CPO seat across various global organizations, led procurement and real estate at enterprise scale, and now brings that know-how here. She is going to be talking today about the been there, clean that data point of view through her work with Collabra Consulting. She's known for calling out the hype with precision. She's pushing teams to start with the why rather than the shiny tools, and making the case that procurement should be leading on risk, not just saving. So please help me in welcoming Canda Rozier. Canda, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. I'm happy to be here and excited for the discussion.
Same here. 30 plus years in the game. You've lived through multiple quote unquote next big things. AI, right? When you look at down the barrel of what's going on, I mean, what feels genuinely different and what maybe feels the same as things you've seen in the past?
It's a great question, and you're right. It seems like every few years there's a new shiny toy, and that's from a tech standpoint as well as from a ProcureTech standpoint. And I think AI is without a doubt that new shiny toy. What feels different to me about it is that there is widespread and growing widespread adoption and use. So this is not, in the past, we've seen the shiny toys, at least aimed at ProcureTech, have really been sort of same old, put a new finish on it, put a new spin, maybe have a different company make a run at a version of the same technology. AI is different, right? I mean, we're seeing it in our own personal lives. It's hard to find somebody now who doesn't at least say, yeah, I've tried it out. So I think that to me is what's different. It's already becoming pervasive, and probably way more pervasive than most people think. That's why I think it's not going to be just a shiny toy, right? I think that there is, there's real longevity. There's real stickiness to this. On the other hand, I do think that there are, in certain cases, it's being a little bit of same old. And that is that, as with any new thing that hits the market, any new, phrase du jour, you get a lot of companies that have to embed the words, right? And if you think back over time, it's been automated, orchestrated. We between the two of us, we could come up with a list very quickly of a dozen phrases.
And now it's AI enabled, AI native, AI powered. It's one and the same. And
yeah,
that
so
I hear what
there's a little bit of that to it, and that's not to say that anybody that claims that should be discounted as just being a Me Too on the phrase du jour. But I think there is some of that that's going on, and that's one of the challenges I think for practitioners, for buyers in today's environment is, how do you figure out who's a Me Too and who has the real stuff? And there is a difference between those that claim to be AI enabled, or now, the next, I think, almost replacing AI enabled is agentic AI. And so there's a lot of phrases showing up on websites where I can tell you, in some of those cases, I'm pretty familiar with the technology behind the website, and nothing's changed, just the marketing pitch.
how do you think that one as a buyer profile, right? Because we talk with practitioners on a day-to-day basis, and when they ask us about the market, right, which they do candidly about our competitors or adjacent solutions, our first, I would say, suggestion is, well, don't just allow them to tell you, have them show it as well, right? That's an important aspect. But I'm just curious from your perspective, right? What are the three kind of like tells or the dead giveaways, so to say, that a solution is marketing AI versus actually embedding and moving the needle in their solution via
Uh,
the technology?
I think one of the key ways is what's on their marketing literature, whether it's a website or what they're I don't know, pitching on LinkedIn or whatever,
Mm,
doesn't
mm,
match with what the salesperson actually says to you.
mm.
And if they keep tossing out the phrase, "Oh yeah, we're AI enabled," but then when you say to them as a practitioner, and some of it is I'm certainly no expert on AI, so
Mm.
for me to say I'm going to play dumb, it's just me playing myself because I'm not an expert.
Oh,
But to be
I
able,
think you're being a bit harsh on yourself there, Canda. But
but to be
sure,
able
I
to
but I hear you.
ask the question, right? To look,
Yeah.
to say to the person that's telling me, "Oh yeah, we're AI enabled," tell me,
Mm,
tell me how, right?
mm,
Explain to me how that works. And sometimes one of the big questions is, so what's your underlying what LLM are you using? What underlying tool are you using? And if you get a deer in the headlights look, Sam, the odds are either they're not really using AI or
right.
their sales team don't know how to answer that question, which ought to be a warning sign. The other thing is if the demo you get is a video recorded demo, or if it's screenshots, as opposed to somebody who says, let's demo to you and you're Canda, you're the buyer, you're my
Mm,
audience. Tell me what
yeah.
it is. In other words, we're going to go through a scenario. And you can tell if they're using a canned demo or if it's a true sandbox, right?
Mm,
And so
mm.
I think that's another tell is that um, if you never get to see anything other than a predefined demo, I'd come at it with a certain skepticism.
Mm. Fair. I'm curious when because I sell technology in the procurement space for a living. You support a lot of companies at being able to evaluate and buy. What does good look like when it comes to a salesperson in technology?
Um, Gosh, if I think back, and this would not just be in the last year with with AI enabled. If I think back over my career, and there have been a few sales executives who stood out, and they stood out not a little bit above the crowd. They were orders of magnitude different. The first thing is they didn't try to tell me what my problem was.
Mm,
They didn't try to sell me something before they understood what the problem was. So they started with why or what. In other words, they listened. They asked
mm,
good questions about
mm,
what were the pain points, what was working, what wasn't working, and then they listened. And then they came back with here are ways in which we could help you, but not we're telling you here's the only way we can help you. Um, and again, I'm talking about more complex transactions, not commoditized type of
right.
solution of selling. Um, and and they made it clear that it was a partnership. That they weren't just this was not just a transactional relationship that they were trying to get. They usually, if you worked with them long enough, they walked away from some opportunities.
Mm,
I would say every salesperson that I would put in that this is what good looks like. if you work with them long enough, they'll actually look at you and say, we don't have a good solution for that.
Right.
Thanks for your interest. Thanks for approaching us, but I'm not going to sell you something that I don't think is what you need, And by the way, all that does, it doesn't close a door. It opens the next series of doors. So I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Absolutely. One of my favorite sales gurus is a guy named Kevin Dorsey. He goes by KD. All over LinkedIn, he's excellent. And he has a framework of, when you're trying to understand the problem, that you never are certain that you can solve it, that you are always assumptive, right? The buyer comes to you and presents a particular problem because you've asked a series of questions to be able to understand their day-to-day and how you potentially could be able to help. And you start always from a position of, well, I assume I believe that we could be able to go and solve that. And never that you are definitively knowing you can solve that until you actually have a technical proof point that you can. And I think that there's a good differentiation there, because buying technology is difficult, which segues into the next question that I had. Practitioners in procurement, they buy for a living, but they don't always, unless they're in tech or IT procurement, buy for themselves. Do you think that there's a discrepancy within, say a direct procurement professional that is typically buying raw materials or machinery or, equipment or things of that sort, that then is transitioning to buying technology for themselves? What do you think that they maybe struggle with within that process?
Um, that's a great question. I have to say, one I've not really thought about before. But you raise a really good point. When you're buying direct materials or commoditized
Right.
materials, you you the buyer just specify my requirements, right? You say, here's the characteristics, here's the technical specs, and as long as the it meets the following chemical specs, as long as it meets the following engineering or I'm out of my bailiwick here about direct materials, but you as the buyer give the specs. And as long as they can certify that they meet those specs, you don't have to get into gray areas, right? But when you're buying technology, there's always a gray area. And particularly when you're buying technology as a service, when you're buying software as a service, when you're buying computing. One of the hardest things that people find, in my experience, that buyers struggle with is moving from whatever they've been buying into something like cloud. I'm needing to buy cloud services or software as a service because it's more gray area than it is definitive black and white against specs. And you have to think differently. You have to ask questions differently, and you have to negotiate and contract differently. But if you've only been buying things that are per spec, whatever that might be, I think that's a big transition. And I think that's why you don't find, at least in my career, I've not found a lot of buyers that make the transition. Now that's, Sam, not to say that they couldn't, but they don't. And I think some of it is because it really is a whole different mindset. And in a way, it's a different personality. And so I think that's where you often see people kind of stick with the lane of direct, if that's what they've built their career in.
Yeah. And we have a little bit of a unique perspective ourselves, right? Because we're a ProcureTech solution provider ourselves that is primarily for direct material teams, right? 70% of our customers are in that space: manufacturing, process manufacturing, energy infrastructure, so forth and so on. And it becomes very interesting when they then have to put themselves in the seat of the user, rather than, like you said, the spec item or good
Mhm.
that is at a particular price point. There's gray areas, there's flexibility, there's configurability, and that's a different type of buying process, right? I want to talk a little bit about buying and implementation processes with you
Okay.
because we talked about it on some of the prep. Procurement tech implementations,
Yeah.
they are failing at an uncomfortable rate, I would say. What
Yes.
is the most hard what's the biggest hard truth, the inconvenient truth that nobody wants to really talk about in procurement?
Not everybody is ready for the ProcureTech that they think they need,
Mm,
they think they want to buy, and definitely not just what somebody wants to sell them. I think that it's this question of readiness, and you're right. You and I talked a little bit about this in an earlier call. Is if you're not ready, then no matter how great the tool is, no matter how great the tech is, you're not going to be successful. And it
mm,
won't necessarily be the technology's fault. Now, I would go on to say that I think part of the problem that we're seeing, and you're right, the failure rates are shocking. You know, depending on who you look at, it's any place now upwards of 80 to 90% failure or abandon rates.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I do think that some of the onus lies with the ProcureTech companies because let's face it, they're motivated to sell. They're motivated by revenue. We all get that. That's how sales, right? That's how commerce works. They're not motivated to say, "Are you ready?"
Mm,
to the client. And then the uncomfortable truth could be, "You're not ready for our tech." You know, the example that I've heard
right.
several people use, and there's all variations of it depending on who your audience is, but you may have the money to buy a Lamborghini, but if you don't know how to A, drive, B, probably drive a manual transmission, and C, drive a high performance sports car, it's going to be a failure. And
Mm,
yet the dealership will sell you the car if you sign the contract.
right.
And so it's when you step back and you think about in the rest of our lives, we accept a certain amount of readiness requirement. And I think one of the other characteristics, and it's common, you see it on LinkedIn a lot now, it's absorption capacity or absorption capability. And it's
What do you mean by that, Canda?
as a user, not only am I ready, do I have the governance structure and the culture and the corporate um, um, acumen to take on this ProcureTech, but do we as a company, as the client, have the capacity to absorb the change and to embrace that change and to embrace what it means to the rest of our business? Dropping ProcureTech in almost always, excuse me, in successful implementations requires process change, policy change, training, often people change, realignment of job responsibilities. If a company isn't ready to do that, willing to do that, and has the cultural and leadership capacity and maybe corporate appetite to do that, you're going to
Yeah.
fail.
Okay. So first and foremost, my sales team is going to hate this episode, but that's on them.
Well, maybe that's another topic in and
No,
of itself.
the failure rate, like you mentioned, right? It could be attributed to a lot of things. Procure tech vendors play their part in that. Readiness plays their part in that, right? Aptitude of the and ability of the business plays a part in that. What does ready look like, right? You know, what are the non-negotiables? What are the things that have got to be right for a team to be able to say, yeah, I am ready?
I think, that there's a long list, and we could fill an hour just talking about what does ready look like. But at a high level,
Yeah.
it's, does the company have um, a unified goal? Do you understand why you want the technology? Right. That's always
Starting
one of
with
the first
the
questions.
end in starting with the end in mind, right?
That's
This
right.
kind
It,
of
are
right.
you getting a new source to pay system simply because your board said we need to deal with fill in the name big ERP system, right?
Right.
And you're just getting it because it's one of 11 modules that is part of the multi-million dollar deal, right?
Mm.
So what's the goal? And is the company aligned on, or are all of the cross-functional stakeholders understanding? They may not have to like it, but are they do they understand, and are they in alignment with, yes, that's why we're doing this? So it goes back to, what's your why? Why are you getting this technology? Um, so I think that that's part of what ready looks like. Do you have a governance structure? And that's got to be, in my mind, a multidimensional governance structure. Do you have governance certainly for the project itself? Do you have governance that ties in all of the parts of your business that whatever this new system is going to touch? One of the examples that I heard on a call earlier this week is someone talking about a ProcureTech implementation that had gone sideways. And they said, how are we supposed to know that there were multiple charts of accounts? And I probably spoke out of turn and said, wasn't finance in on this whole project team with you? Blank stare. So that's part of the readiness, is who are all the affected parties, and really
Right.
understanding, and it's boring work, Sam, but a thorough cross-functional process map. What are the processes that the new technology is either meant to improve or is inadvertently going to touch that nobody's thinking about? And
Mm.
if you approach things in silos, you're never going to know that. That to me is part of readiness. Data, right? And again, it's certainly one of the hot topics in the industry today, dirty data. And there's so much truth to that. But that's just an element to me of readiness. If you have multiple sources of truth, if you haven't gone through the process of applying rigor to both normalizing your data, but more importantly, standardizing a process so that you don't want to clean dirty data and a year from now have a new pile of year-old dirty data, right? You need to clean the history, the existing stuff, and then you need to change your process so that from the point in time you have clean data going forward, it stays clean. So
Mm.
there is I think I'm going to say it's not just dirty data, it's dirty processes
Mm.
that you have to fix.
Yeah.
And that's part of
Mm.
readiness. And some of this
Yeah.
starts with an acknowledgement. I've talked to some companies who not only aren't ready because they haven't started raising this level of readiness, they haven't even started with the acknowledging they have a problem to fix.
Very interesting. I think that you raised a lot of interesting points there. It's the element of governance. It's the element of data, cleanliness. It's the element of why are we doing this, right? you also raised that, of course, fixing the problem is not just about the technology; it's the people and the process involved, right? And fixing
Hmm.
the process to make sure that the technology is just not a band-aid on a bad process. Now,
Right.
becoming outcome focused, talking about the whys, what would be some of the recurring whys that are valid whys that you hear out in the market when you're speaking with practitioners and your clients? What are some of those valid whys, those driving forces that you see companies absolutely needing solutions, whether they be point solutions or broader suites? What are some of those driving forces that you're seeing today?
I think one of the big ones is risk and governance,
Hmm.
where companies have, and some of it's because of regulatory mandates, in
Sure.
around the globe. There's different mandates coming from different jurisdictions, and the fact that there's a recognition that not only do you have to be compliant with the jurisdiction that you're headquartered in, but if you do business
Yeah.
10,000 miles away with
Yeah.
someone in that jurisdiction, you too
Oh
have
yeah.
to be compliant. And I think that,
CS triple D, CSRD, EUDR, they're all very clear on those particular aspects
and
as well. But that
so many companies have just tried to ignore that, tried to say, well, I'm a US based company.
right,
I really don't have to worry about what the EU mandate is. I don't have
right.
to, data privacy. Nah, that's not us, right? And I think we've evolved, and thank heavens, to a point that companies are now saying, actually, it is a mandate I have to do. I have to. So that's one of the driving whys. I think the last 5 years from starting at the beginning of the pandemic, has highlighted things like supplier risk, supply chain risk being two different things, but both supply chain and supplier risk, um, resiliency of both suppliers and supply chains. I
Mm,
think all of those things have moved increasingly into the forefront as to why you need to improve technology. Um, Certainly, AI is becoming a why, because
mm,
I think increasingly, uh, leaders are now saying, and by the way, these are people who, what they know about AI may be what they've learned from their college age or teenage age kid talking about it, right? Hey, Dad, have you tried Chat GPT or something like that? But I think increasingly they're saying there are productivity to be gained here
mm,
by using this, and by using it the right way. And therefore, I don't know that I'd call that a why, but I would call that an enabler of why. And I think I'm seeing more and more where people are saying, I don't just want AI for the sake of AI, but help me understand how it can help me. And so I think that is one of the driving forces. And then the last one, and again, I think I could keep going on this, but the last one I'll mention is, over the last probably 5 years, I'm sure you have seen, we've all seen all of the solution maps, right? All over LinkedIn in the industry. Everybody's got their own take, from spider charts to this layout to that layout. And
sure.
I can honestly say, on some of them, even using Zoom, I can't get it big enough to read all the stuff that's on them, right? The landscape is full. Some people would say the word full is wrong. I should say the landscape is littered with players. Some of them are longtime players, some of them are new entrants. A lot of them won't be on the playing field in 2 years. That's my probably not so humble opinion. Um, and I think that one of the whys is that over the last 5+ years, companies have bought a lot of bespoke niche products. And a lot of these quite legitimately cool functionality. A lot of it is not integrated. They've got now, giving you an example, uh, early last year. So it's been let's say a year ago, working with a client who brought me in to help them figure out how to exit from a whole lot of niche solutions that they had bought, some of them with multi-year subscriptions and license terms. At least they had 14, if memory serves correctly, products in addition to their
Wow.
ERP. 5 or 6, something like that, were not literally being used. Had one of them had never even been implemented. They had had it for, I don't know, a year or something. Put it this way, this was absolutely, these were impaired assets from an accounting perspective.
Legitimate shadow technology sitting on the shelf.
Right. Sitting on the shelves, and more importantly, churning up recurring costs in their budget.
Yeah.
And so they I think that's one of the whys. And just a note to your editor, you'll want to clean this up because I know I'm jumping all around on this one. But I think that the fact that there's been so many ProcureTech solutions out there, and a lot of these are really good products, and a lot of them are shiny toys, and a lot of them had great promise and then just didn't quite get the traction. Companies bought them. They either started to embark on the journey. Sometimes they didn't embark at all. Sometimes they did, and now they've got this little silo of technology that's being used by 7 people in one department. And I think one of the whys is we need to clean up. We need to get back to what matters. We need to, and this goes back to the first why. What's the overall outcome? And how are the solutions that I've already invested in supporting that outcome? And so sometimes it's not what new thing do I use, it's how do I winnow down what I had thought I was going to use and focus in on what really matters.
Wow. Well, it's insights directly from the market, and I think hard truths for a lot of ProcureTech vendors to be able to look themselves over in the mirror and say, what is the business value that I'm offering? Am I focused on eating my little piece of the pie and or ultimately integrating into a business's workflow, right? Because I think that without that approach, with that, then it's hard to be able to make the impact that ProcureTech promises to be able to make as well. And I think that it's a fair take that you have on this, right? It's directly from the market as well. I'm curious, two questions, and it's single sentences. I would love you to finish off the sentences. So finish this sentence. In procurement, the fastest way to waste a year is to
go for the shiny toy because it's shiny without figuring out why you're doing it.
Okay, fair. Now, let's spin it around. In procurement, the fastest way to gain a year or win a year is to
understand your business drivers, corporate business drivers, be partnering with your internal stakeholders, and make changes that support those 2 goals.
Fair insights.
Which, by the way,
you've said that,
sorry, you asked me for one, but maybe I'll put this in parentheses. And that doesn't always include ProcureTech as the solution.
Absolutely. Now, you've said that risk management during this session should be one of the core, kind of elements that businesses are focusing in on as kind of a why that they should be governing their vendor base, but secondly, also digging deeper into creating more resilient supply chains, leveraging technology to be able to do so, getting stakeholders and sponsorship to be able to do so. Now, why is procurement not already treating risk management as a top tier mandate in all organizations?
There's probably lots of reasons. A few that come top of mind. Traditionally, historically, procurement has been cash motivated. In other words, it's years and years ago, I heard it called the cash register mentality. I know people don't use cash registers like they used to, but this idea that I'm savings oriented. And if procurement is still primarily or only focused on savings, which, by the way, may not be procurement's choice or, quote, fault. It may be an organizational corporate mandate. If you're only focused on savings, then you haven't been focused on or maybe given the resources or the mandate to go after risk management, risk mitigation, and governance. I think that over the last 5 years, and I do think, people say, "What is there something good that came out of the pandemic?" I think in corporations, it did shift how companies think about what matters, and at the very least, it's elevated the discussion about risk and governance. So I think there's a trend towards more and more companies elevating the importance of risk and making it, frankly, a mandatory deliverable of procurement. But there's still plenty of companies where 80% or 90% of procurement's objectives and how they're measured is all about how much did you save. And I'm not downplaying savings. Believe me, I built a career on it. But it can't be, and I will tell you, even thinking back in my own career 20 years ago, it wasn't the only thing.
No.
I hope I didn't go too far off topic on that one, Sam.
No, absolutely. And understand. I think that the thing that's always so interesting is how do you quantify the boogeyman of risk, right? Risk is important to organizations when it occurs, right? As long as it's there in the distance, then we can be able to keep it at bay with not really thinking about it, right? And focusing on our short to mid-term gains, which is within, as you mentioned before, cost optimization and savings, which is the ultimate KPI.
Mm-hmm.
But it costs a whole heck of a lot when a supplier winds up in the news and your share price is hit, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and you really hit on it, that the quantification of elevating risk, the quantification of risk management and risk mitigation is in the negative, right? It's in that negative space of you can only really quantify it when it happens, but you can't afford not to focus on it as a positive activity. And where I've found that procurement, I guess, has an easier route to focusing on risk management is in companies which are fairly heavily regulated. It could be pharmaceutical, it could be banking, it could be financial service. There's industries where regulatory requirements are necessary for the company to stay in business. And in those organizations, it's become not just a part of procurement scope, it's become a mandatory priority for procurement. I'm beginning to see that move to adjacent industries, I think, because there's a greater awareness now that it actually, if you wait long enough, right? If you wait long enough, there will be a risk incident at a company, right? It's like that old adage: if you speed when you drive, if you drive long enough, you're going to get a ticket, whether you like it or not, right? The odds are just going to come up. And I think there's a similar awareness in companies that if we aren't managing risk, we will have to deal with this. and there have been enough high profile examples of companies that didn't deal with it that I think the message is kind of now moving out of just the regulated industries.
And I can agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that we see it, that the approach is an integrated approach to risk management in the supplier base and the supply chain to create resilience. And I think that a lot of people are starting to look at it not as, well, how can I get a return on investment, but what is the cost of my inaction, right?
Right.
But yet again, it lives in that negative space. And let's be honest, it's not always so sexy to live in that negative space and risk, right? But with that being said, I think that you've given a fantastic insight into the market today from both sides of the table, and I thank you so much for that, Canda. Before we let you go, I have some quick fire questions for you. Absolutely nothing about procurement, supply chain, sourcing, or the role. Only about you and a few fun questions. One word or one sentence answers to them for this quick fire round. Are you up for it?
Sure. Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right. I'm always curious. Are you an iPhone or an Android person?
iPhone.
All right. All expenses paid trip. Family can join you. Friends if you'd like. It's on us. Where are you heading? You got to go tomorrow, though, by the way.
Turkey.
Okay. Any particular reason why?
It's been on top of my bucket list for a long time.
Cool. I've heard that Istanbul is fantastic. I've never been myself. But coffee or tea drinker?
Coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon.
Okay. Last question. Podcast, book, or something alike. One professional and one personal, or just one overall, if you had to suggest.
It's personal and it's old. Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard.
Fantastic. I'm sure that there's going to be people Googling directly following this episode. Thank you so much for coming and dropping knowledge for our listeners. If people want to be able to get in touch with you, to be able to understand what you guys are doing at Collabra Consulting, what's the easiest way to be able to do so?
Easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. There's only one of me between my first and last names. I'm pretty unique. And that's the easiest way, and all my contact information is listed there. And Sam, I want to thank you for the opportunity to join you guys today on this discussion. And it's been fun.
Same here. The pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Canda Rozier, for the time.